Welcome back to my adventures, where every adventure is unique. We'll continue our discussion on the Tour du Mont Blanc, my experience, risk and rewards, part 3. Today we'll be talking about my hiking gear, what I took with me in detail. I had a 40-liter rucksack, and I break down here clothing on the left-hand side and gear on the right-hand side that fit into my rucksack. The items that are outlined in red bold are the ones that I was wearing, so they weren't necessarily in my rucksack, and everything else that isn't was. I think the size of the rucksack, people say it's usually only good for 2 to 3 days, and to take it on an 11-day hike is too small. I did meet some people with 55 liter backpacks, which were quite heavy, but they were, I'm only about 5'9" and about 165, 170 pounds. The people who were carrying those backpacks were over 6 feet and more capable in terms of their body weight. Because I think they say you can carry your maximum carry load is 20% of your body weight. So for larger hikers, you're able to carry your heavier loads, which compared to other hikers, simply because your body weight is higher, so you're able to do that. I found 40 liters to be. There's two things with rucksacks, in my opinion. One is volume, and the other one is the actual weight. Volume affects how large the items that you're putting into the rucksack. How much space they actually take up. So in some cases you may need more space simply because the volume of the items that you're taking are such. They may not be heavy, but their weight to size ratio is such that they take a lot of space. Even though they don't weigh a lot, they take a lot of space in your rucksack. So you've only got so much space to use, and you have to be concerned when you buy gear not only about the a lot of people just focus on mass, but obviously the weight, but the other factor you really have to focus on is the pack size. And if the items that you're carrying are too large and you have many of them, you're going to find that your rucksack's going to fill up quite quickly, and it's going to be a challenge to get in all the gear that the essential gear that you need. No matter how big your rucksack is, even if it's 55 liters, you're always going to feel like you want to take something more. You're going to have to leave something behind. That's just the nature of hiking. You can't take everything with you, even though you'd like to. But to get the essentials, I think is what's critical. There's the good thing about the Tour du Mont Blanc. There's always stores in the small villages or the larger towns and cities that surround it. If you're missing something, you can always pick up a few items. I did do that myself while I was hiking, and so it's always possible to get stuff if you have to leave stuff behind. So just to go through it quickly, I had a red fleece cap, which I use mostly at night when I was sleeping to keep my head warm. Obviously, if it's -5°C out, it's nice to have some warmth on your head, so that was really good to have. I did hike with it a few times in the cold mornings, but in general, I use that to sleep with. I had a wide brim sun hat, which I highly recommend people to take a wide brim hat. There were a lot of people wearing baseball caps, but that doesn't really protect your face that well, or the back of your head. And at elevation, the sun's rays and the UV rays they increase with strength. And if you're not protected well from the sun, you're going to either have to continually lather up with sunscreen, which isn't that great, or you're going to look for hats that are going to block out most of the sun. This hat covered my head basically from any of the sun rays, and I didn't have to put in a lot of sunscreen on my face because of it. The couple times I did put sunscreen on, some of it got in my eyes and burned, and it was really painful for about an hour of the hike, simply because I unfortunately put a bit in my eye, or some of it got in my eye. So I prefer a wide brim hat to, say, a baseball cap. If you do get sunburned, again, the risk of skin cancer being what it is, and at the increased elevation, you're only amplifying the effects of the sun compared to if you're at sea level. So take the sun seriously. If you're hiking for 8-10 hours in the day under blue skies, sunny days, the overall impact on you is going to be quite significant. I did meet a hiker from Michigan who had a lot of people were in t-shirts and shorts, and their legs at the end of the day were lobster red. And I don't know if they realized how much damage they were doing to their skin, but they weren't really tanned to come in begin with. And I saw him hiking later in the day, and his legs were literally this color red. He probably didn't note it at the time, but I'm sure at night and in the next morning he would have felt the effects of it. So the other thing you need for the sun is a good pair of UV protected and ideally mountain designed sunglasses. These ones have nice wide edges to block out any sun coming from the side, and they're quite necessary. I wouldn't say it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, I think, because the sun is quite bright and it will affect your eyes, especially on a sunny day. If you're looking, sometimes you got snow reflection, which only amplifies the effects of the sun as well. So if the sun's rays hit off the snow, it basically then projects onto you, and you're going to get, you can get quite serious eye damage, depending on where you are. Obviously, you're climbing mountains in snow, it's more amplified, and there's not as much snow on the tour, but still there is an increased risk of eye damage at altitude. So you should really invest in a good mountain type set of eyewear, as I've done here. I had a RAB, and I'll go through all there's another list coming up where I'll give you the specifications of the gear, because I'm a bit of a tech gear nut who wants specs and all the rest of it and names and models. I'll have a next slide here where I'll show you what this gear actually was, but I'm just going to go through it quite quickly. I had a RAB down jacket, which was great for the morning. I had a icebreaker merino, 100% merino wool, 260 over top, which was long sleeve, which was great. I slept in this quite often with this. I had just a Berghaus t-shirt, which was good after hiking, just to put on when you're around the camp. In the tent, I had a RAB water repellent jacket, which I used on a few days when I got caught in the rain, and I think it's a necessary item to have. It's not like you can get rain jackets that they may repel the water for an hour, but when you're walking a day or half a day in constant rain, you need something that's a bit stronger and repellent. So the RAB jacket seemed to fit the purpose. It wasn't the most comfortable item that I had, but I came to appreciate it when it was raining, and I basically was able to stay dry. The problem with getting wet is obviously you're in colder weather, you could have wind, you're wet, you're tired, and you could get into a situation where hypothermia could start to develop. So it's good to keep the water off you, especially I didn't have rain pants, I just had a rain jacket, but keeping it off your upper torso from getting wet is quite important, especially your chances of hiking in rain, regardless, over 11 days, you're going to have probably 2, 3, 4 days at least of rain, so you're going to have to be prepared for it. Rather than wearing a t-shirt when I hiked, I always wore a slightly oversized cotton shirt. I didn't have to put sunscreen all over my arms all the time. I did put some on my hands, but I didn't have to, lather myself up in sunscreen. So my arms were always protected. I never got any sunburns when I wore this. So that was, I think, a key item to have. Like I say, long sleeves instead of short sleeves. It was still cool. I didn't feel hot wearing this at all. You say, well, it's too hot, I want to wear something cooler. I never felt hot wearing my long sleeve shirt. I had some fleece gloves. I had a bathing suit, which I actually used in Champlain Lac. The water was quite cool, but it was great to actually jump in the lake and swim around for a few minutes. And then I had a pair of underwear, but I only had one pair, so I was sort of alternating days between wearing the bathing suit while hiking and wearing the underwear. And when the chances permitted, I'd try and wash them out with some hand soap and let them dry while one was being used, and that sort of got me through the trail adequately enough. It's probably not the most fresh every day that you would like, but given the circumstances, there was you're hiking and on the trail, you can't expect to be dressed in a three-piece suit, and your hygiene is going to suffer a bit no matter what. Simply the reality of hiking in remote alpine regions. I took a pair of hiking pants. I'd not worn them before. These were Berghaus, and I didn't really have too great of expectations of these. I thought they might be too stiff and hot, and I wasn't really, I took them, but I hadn't, having not worn them before, I didn't know if they would really work that well. But I was really pleased with them. They were nice and stretchy and cool. They kept my legs protected from the sun, and they also kept any insects or ticks from getting into my legs and crawling up and biting me. So again, as well with this, you keep ticks away from you, whereas if you expose yourself, and I'll discuss ticks in a while if you're not familiar with what they are, you just limit or reduce your chance of getting ticks. Wearing white is good for sun reflection, where if you have dark clothing, you will attract more sun energy, like heat energy. The other thing, if you're wearing dark colors, you will attract ticks more. So ticks and insects in general are not attracted to light colors. So try to wear lighter white colors. Obviously, white pants is not going to be ideal. So maybe something like I'm showing here, tan, seemed to work quite well. I was really pleased with these. And then I had some loose jogging pants, really thin material that I used also to sleep with. So if it was cool, that one time on Col de la Croix de Bonhomme, I wore my hat at night. I wore this, and I wore these as well in my down sleeping bag, and that kept me warm. I didn't have any problems with sleeping. I also had a Morel Moab 3 Gore-Tex hiking boots with mid-ankle protection. Again, I think I said before that I had twisted my ankle 3 times quite badly, and I literally popped up and was able to go and felt no pain while I was hiking, either that day or the next. You think sometimes it might swell up and be painful the next day. No, it didn't. Each time this mid-ankle protection stopped me from either spraining or breaking my ankle. They were quite bad falls too. It was more of the full weight on your ankle type roll or fall or slip. So these boots really saved me from 3 incidents out of, you're taking, 10-15,000 steps a day over 11 days. So you're making about 150,000 steps, and you can imagine getting some of them wrong is going to happen simply because you're tired, or the trail is really rough, or it's raining, or you lose your concentration and focus, whatever the situation. I think it's inevitable that you're probably, unless you're an experienced strong hiker, you're probably going to end up rolling your ankle more than once, simply because of the difficulty of the trail. And I highly recommend, again, I would say it's not a must-have, like it's not a nice to have, it's a must-have to have mid-ankle high boots. These also have Vibram soles, which is good for traction on rocks, and it's great for hiking. This is well-known, famous material. It's also good for insulative properties in the case of lightning. Potentially, I don't know if these are fully insulated for a lightning strike not necessarily a direct strike, but even a ground strike. I don't know if they'll insulate you to that degree, but I would rather have something like that on my feet than other options. And they're really good in terms of the level of. I've had these on 2 hikes. I had these on the Nepal hike, the Everest Base Camp hike, as well as this hike, and they've both come through with winning colors. I literally took them out of the box and did the hike. I didn't break them in or anything like that. I simply took them out of the box and did the hike. I didn't get any blisters, and I used 100% merino wool socks with these boots, and I didn't get one blister over both hikes. The Everest Base Camp hike and the tour hike, I didn't have one blister. I can assure you, I saw many hikers. Their morning routine was to take out all these Band-Aids and tape, and they were just sitting there for like 20 minutes taping their feet up from blisters they had incurred or were trying to prevent. And I didn't get one blister over the entire hike, using 100% merino wool socks, not blends, 100% merino. You can find them out there, but you have to be careful because a lot of them sold as merino wool are actually blends. You must get 100% merino. And then I strongly recommend these Morel MOAB, Mother of All Boot 3 Gore-Tex boots with the mid-calf. The people I saw who were hiking in, like running, trail running type shoes or even running shoes, I saw one of them get a badly sprained ankle. They rolled their ankle, and they were then, some like you roll your ankle and you're in the middle of nowhere. It's you can't just jump in the car and drive away. She had to literally hike her way out of the middle of nowhere to the next spot, and then day after day she slowly recovered. But I know she was in quite a bit of pain because she was walking maybe 50% as fast as she used to, and it's just I think the risk for not having a mid-ankle boot, it's way too high. I think it's a necessity to have, especially like I say for novice, beginner, intermediate hikers, or even stronger hikers who are not used to alpine hiking. Maybe just rolling hills, to have that protection. You're going to need it, and you will regret not having it. I think, especially when you get injured. I also took a pair of, instead of once you finish your hike and you're in the campsite or you're at the tent, you don't want to necessarily be walking around in your hiking boots. So I brought a pair of surf socks, which are neoprene. For those who aren't, they're basically neoprene, and they've got like an embossed or rubbered sole on them. And they're great because you can put them on. You put your socks on, you put these on. If it's wet outside or if there's wet, dew in the morning, it won't get into your foot and make your foot wet. It's got a bit of traction on it, so you're not walking on hard rocks, feeling every little bump. And they're lightweight, and you can roll them up and stuff them in your sock instead of carrying like a pair of running shoes, which are really heavy and awkward and take up a lot of volume. The load is, for the running shoes, where do you stick them? It's just the volume issue. It's not necessarily the weight, it's the volume, and especially when you only have 40 liters. I took 2 pair of 100% merino wool socks, and I took a pair of cotton socks sort of by default because that's what I wore when I was on the plane. So that was really the extent of my clothing gear. And again, the red items I was wearing, everything else was in my rucksack. I've got in this rucksack, there's 3 side pockets around the outside layer. There's a bit of storage on the belt, which is quite common with most bags. There is a waterproof inner insert on the inside, so you can put all your gear in and pull the drawstring, and it's watertight, so you don't have to necessarily worry about your dry clothes getting wet. There is also a lower half. There's 2 side pockets on this one. I'll tell you what that is in a second. And then there's a lower half section. So there's 2 compartments. There's the main compartment, and then there's a division, and there's a lower compartment. This isn't one of the the flashy, more expensive Osprey rucksacks out there. It's a little bit heavier than some of them, but for what I paid for it, I think it did quite adequate. I was really pleased with it. I didn't have any problems with it. The other thing I would just mention on volume of your rucksack, some of the sections that you may want to hike, I'm thinking of the Fenêtre des Arpents. The larger your sac is, the more challenging and difficult it's going to be for you when you get to the sections where you have to climb over very large boulders. You're literally, you're rock climbing at that point. You're not really hiking. If you have a large rucksack, you could get, it could get, entangled or start hitting some of the rocks that you're having to climb around. And, that's something also to keep in mind, is that at times that large volume of rucksack might actually physically cause you some difficulties when you're going through some challenging terrain. The rest of the time, I don't think it's a problem if it's larger. It's just, I think that section coming to mind. I mean, I was even concerned about mine getting snagged a few times or bumping up against rocks, because you're literally on your hands and knees and you're scrambling through rock boulders, huge rock boulders. They're beside you. They're in narrow areas, and you can catch on them or bump against them. So it could be a bit challenging to get through with a large rucksack on your back. In terms of gear, I had a Garmin Forerunner watch, which I used to monitor my my performance. I didn't get it to work as well as I wanted it to, simply because I kept, unfortunately, thinking I started it and I didn't, or thinking I stopped it and I didn't. And sometimes I let the battery go down. I got a few good results out of it, not as many as I'd like. And if I go, I will definitely use this to better record my performance day in, day out. Then I had a headlamp, which it was sort of a nice to have for the tent, but it actually became quite a necessity. And I think, again, you should invest in a quite good headlamp. You might need it depending on the circumstances. In my case, I did need it, and it was adequate. It wasn't great. It's something I might look to upgrade if I try to do the tour again. I had a stove. It's not a Jetboil. It's an OEX with a canister, and it's kind of an all-in-one where you can put your stuff in, heat it up, and I like that better than carrying bowls and pans and utensils, because again, it's question about volume. So this is pretty much self-contained. You put the canister inside, everything goes inside, so your net volume is quite low compared to what you're getting when it's assembled. So I took one of these with me, and I used it, but not as much as I'd like to have, and that was because I didn't really have the food that it was needed to utilize it better. So, if I go next time, I'll definitely utilize this more and better, and probably enjoy my hike more, because I simply didn't have adequate food source throughout the tour as I'd hoped to. Another, I think, must-have is trekking poles. Unless you're a really strong hiker who's done a lot of alpine hiking, and even then, maybe it's a good idea. Some of the hikers were taking them, but anyone who isn't in that category of strong hiking with alpine experience should, this is another must-have. I think it's a necessity. It not only helps you get up the hills, it gives you about 10% to 15% more power when you're going ascending. It also gives you a tremendous advantage when you're descending. It takes a lot of the instability out. It stopped me from falling and slipping countless times. This is a necessity. I don't think this is a nice to have. This is a necessity. I did see a couple novice hikers trying to hike without poles, and they were just literally really struggling to get up hills, and then it was really dangerous to watch them walk down, because one slip and they're going to fall far. So if you have two poles sort of stabilizing you while you're descending, it's invaluable. And I would not have completed the tour without trekking poles. I'll tell you right now, it would not have happened. I couldn't have done it without the trekking poles. So I would say these are a must-have, not a nice-to-have. I took some soft foam earphones, just because if you're sleeping near rivers or noisy tents or near livestock with cowbells, it's good to have those along just to make sure you get better sleep. Or if it's raining, I used them a few times and glad to have them. Again, I had a canister for my stove. I used the short one with a bit more compact gas, and rather than a long one. Again, it's because of volume. That canister was fitting in the side pocket. I had a platypus water filtration system. I like the concept of this because you can roll it down when it's not in use, and basically it's quite compact to carry. It's got the filter in here. Of all the items, this one performed the worst. It actually developed a leak, and then getting the filter to screw into the end, it was problematic. So there were two faults with this, and really I was quite disappointed on this. Actually, when I got back, I sent it back and got a refund for it. So I'm really disappointed. I don't know if that was just the one I happened to. It was sort of like a bad lot, but I was disappointed because I was really I kind of like the concept of this, and I might go back to something like this or something similar. Overall, I think it was good to take a water filter system, even though you're drinking out of the glacier tops. I filtered everything. I drank. I never got sick. I know at least 2 or 3 other hikers I was talking with. They got sick stomachs, really bad. And so I kept filtering all my water just because probably I didn't need to, but I did anyways, and I never got a sick stomach. So maybe there's some merit in having this regardless. I doubt the public taps are contaminated with anything that would make you sick, but taking this, it just was an extra layer of caution. If you have to take out of the rivers or the mountain streams, you have to be careful if there's livestock around, because obviously the livestock urinate in the water, and that can become a problem. Otherwise, it should be mostly okay to go through a platypus system if you've got a mountain stream, and it's good to have if you're out of water. There's not an abundant amount of water taps available on the tour. Certainly not as many as some of the YouTube videos seem to suggest. There can be 10, 15, 20 kilometers without a water tap, and you can only carry so much water. So you may find that you need to tap off one of the mountain streams at points. So you definitely want a water filter, not drinking it straight off the source. I had obviously a SIG water bottle. This was a 1 liter option. I had my Samsung phone. Yes, you can get signals on mountaintops, no problem. Watch out for roaming fees. Look at Labara as an option. It's usually a pay-as-you-go sort of thing. You put in €10 and you get so many hours. And if you're concerned about roaming charges, you can bypass that with Labara. I took a lot of trail mix with me, which I was glad to have. I'd take a handful of this maybe once every 2 hours. And then also some dark chocolate, a piece of dark chocolate. That kind of gave me energy while I was hiking. And I think that's a really good winning combination. I had some Nestea flavored crystals that I poured into the water just to give it a bit of flavor. A nice to have, maybe not a necessity, but it was still nice to have a bit of flavor in the water. I had some coffee for my morning, coffee sachet for my morning drinks at times. I did bring these Compeed blister packs just in case, but I never used them. Again, I had the merino wool and the Moabs, no blisters, so I didn't use these. I wouldn't take them again. It's the second time I've used this combination without blisters, so this is not necessary. I had a USB cable for my battery pack, mobile battery pack for my cell phone. It's a curved model, which is quite nice to fit into your rucksack. I had some toothpaste, small travel size, with some body wash. I had some SPF 50 sunscreen lotion, which I used on my hands and any other area of skin that was exposed. Sometimes the back of my neck could be exposed, so I put a bit on there. I had a couple power bars of varying, I always had 1 or 2 of these available to take a nibble. They have some nice ones in France, different than these, but I usually had 1 of these at least available. Just for some energy as you're hiking. Obviously a toothbrush. I purchased some lip balm in Courmayeur because I found it was necessary. My lips were getting quite dry and chapped. I had quite a few Lipton iced teas that I was buying from the refuges. They're quite expensive at £4 or €4.50. I wouldn't go this route next time. I spent too much money buying Lipton iced teas. probably like 3 or 4 a day. I probably should have stayed more with the water and ice crystals. I actually picked this up in Courmayeur to try to cut down on the costs for this, because it's nice to have an actual iced tea, but it's nice and cold, but it's quite expensive. The other thing is that the refuges won't take the can back, so you actually have to hike until you get to a town or village to put these in a garbage. You can't leave it with the refuge. So I'm sitting there hiking with all these empty iced tea cans in my rucksack, which drove me nuts. So I wanted to get away from the cost and the hassle of having to carry these out all the time. It was really annoying. Speaking of having to carry it out, in terms of garbage on the trail, I don't recall seeing any garbage all over the entire 170 kilometer trail, other than maybe someone had a tissue and it fell out of their pocket. But you certainly weren't seeing like pop cans or any other containers strewn all over the trail. It's really in great pristine condition, and do your part when you go to make sure it stays that way. Don't start littering around. Nothing's worse than to see garbage all over the place. I don't know if that's because of the hikers being respectful, or if it's because someone actually comes along every so often and cleans up garbage, but I didn't see any cans, any debris, any wrappers, food wrappers, nothing, which I think is great testament. If it's the hikers who are doing it, great on us, because it certainly is nice to look at nature instead of reminders of civilization scattered all over the place and making it really unpleasant to walk through. So again, I didn't see any refuse anywhere on the trail, other than, like I say, I think there was 1 or 2, and I'm talking maybe 1 or 2 Kleenex tissues had fallen out of someone's pocket, and that was it. That's all I saw. I had, like I say, a battery pack. You can charge in the refuges or the hotels, and this lasts for about 4 days for my cell phone or my watch. And so it's quite powerful. Good to have along, because you don't want to have to rely on just your cell phone or your watch for power. Obviously, like I say, that one example where that I talked about earlier, where that girl fell down the side of the mountain and her cell phone saved her. You can imagine what position she'd be in if her cell phone battery died. To have a battery pack to charge that, I think, again, it's relying on this, especially for navigation as well. A lot of people were relying on it. You really should have a battery pack with you, charged battery pack. Keep it as charged as possible to charge your electronics, because if you're out there and you're relying solely for navigation, or you get lost, or you get you've had an injury and you can't get out, your cell phone is the only thing that's probably going to keep you alive. And if the battery dies, your last chance. So make sure you have a battery pack to charge it up again. I would definitely say that's almost a must-have for electronics. I had a small micro towel that I used to wipe off my tent dew in the morning before I put it in my pack, and I also had shower with it. So that was good to have along. The Cicerone guidebook I carried in my pocket and looked at quite often to see where I was and where I was going. Quite helpful. A lot of other hikers didn't have it, and I was kind of always giving them information from it, and they were really helpful to have that. And we kind of exchanged information. They gave me information off the GPS or the weather, and I gave them information on the trail. So there's a bit of a mutual exchange. Again, that shared camaraderie. I did have a Ranger, a proper compass, good quality compass, and I had maps for 1 to 50,000 scale for Italy and France. I think the Italian one includes the Swiss side, but the French one is definitely limited. It doesn't include the French side. So unfortunately, you have to carry 2 maps, which takes space, but I had them in my packs. Most of this gear here was going in these side pockets. So I didn't really have to use, interior volume for containing this stuff. Obviously, I had my wallet. I had a Rab down sleeping bag. Again, more than adequate for the temperature range, -5 to say 15 degrees C in the valleys, and -5 in the coals. I wasn't cold wearing these items while I slept. I had a blow up Sea to Summit air pillow. It wasn't that great at first because this is the first time I used it, and I blew it up too much pressure, and I found it too hard. So I simply let pressure out, and then your head conforms to it nicely. And sure, it's a bit small, but again, worrying about volume. I didn't have like a stiff neck in the morning or anything like that. So I found it adequate. I wouldn't say it was the most plush pillow and the greatest, but it certainly was adequate. I think it did yeoman duty. I'm glad I had it with me for sure. Otherwise, you're going to get a stiff neck if you don't have any pillow, or if what are you going to use? So usually these blow up ones work quite well. I had a thermal rest pad, which is a blow up inflatable one. No problems with that. Only good things to say. I think it performed well. Most of my gear performed really well. Like I say, the only item I was disappointed in was this. Some of the items, if I do the trek again, I would probably upgrade. But in general, I was pleased with, I would say, a good 90% of the gear, 95% of the gear I took. I was really pleased with how it performed. The tent I had was a Robin's Starlight 1 Expedition, and I'm going to have a discussion about this later, but that was my tent, and I think at the end of the day, I was really pleased to have it. The thing about this tent, it's great value. It's got materials that are usually on the high-end tents, meaning 500 to 1,000 pound tents. This one was, I think, 139 pounds, but it's got really high-grade materials on it. It's also been wind tested, and it's got really high hydrodynamic head, which means it can withstand a lot of rain before it starts to leak. There's once I learned how to work with it, it's the first time I used it. There's a good condensation design in here to limit the amount of condensation you get at night in the morning. So I was really pleased with this tent, but I did have a bit of struggles with it that were more my fault than the tent's fault. I mean, there was part of it that was the tent fault, but my corrections, I was the one more to blame than the tent. So I give this a really big check. I'm really pleased with that tent, and the value is just out of this world. It's nuts. It's not a very popular tent. I don't know why, because it's got such high specs. You're talking about tents that have like a 1,000 pound tent material in a 140 pound tent. It's just insane. I don't know how they can do it, but it's a great tent. It's a little bit heavy. Maybe that's why it's not so popular, but I don't mind carrying this tent, even if it's another 500 grams heavier than the competition. The value is just, it's tremendous value. So that was my gear that I took with me in total. Obviously, I'm not showing. I would have, cans of. I usually tried to carry 2 cans of Lipton iced tea with me that I would then pour into the water bottle and mix it up and sort of reduce it. But in general, this is what I carried, with some variations. Obviously, if you pick up some food, a baguette, you eat half of it, you put it in your rucksack and you carry on, and then you eat it. So I'm not going to include it in this because it was just an intermittent periodic load. But in general, I carried all of this through the tour. So my hiking gear, what I did not have, and probably I would need a 50-liter rucksack to take. I didn't take my tablet, which is a nice thing to have, but it's volume and mass. I didn't have a first aid kit. I'm not a real big fan of these, to be honest with you. I think they take up a lot of volume. They have a lot of stuff in here that's of not much value. Having said that, as a solo hiker, you really need to be as self-sufficient as you can. Like I say, I was finding myself hiking alone for 2-3 hours multiple times. If something happens, you're basically on your own. You have to rely on yourself. Other times, maybe another hiker will have some first aid to help you, but you really shouldn't rely on that. So if I do it again, I'm going to be selective and take a few items out of sort of a few items that are like first aid necessities, whereas a lot of stuff in here I don't think it is, and probably include them in my next trek, simply because you have to be better prepared than I was, and if something goes wrong. But I think these are a lot of volume and a lot of weight for very little value. If you get injured, I'm sure you're going to use what's in here, but I think it's not really great value. It's costly, and I don't think it's good like mass to volume ratio. It's wasted. If you have a large rucksack, maybe you can afford to carry it, but in general, I wouldn't take these. I don't like them. I didn't have rain pants. I was relying on my Berghaus pants in the rain, which they did soak up water, but I had the waterproof jacket on, so it would be probably. I didn't hike a lot in the rain. I tried not to hike in the wet days, but I did get caught in the rain. It's probably nice to have some sort of rain pant. I might consider taking something like that next time. They'd have to be quite, foldable, low volume, low weight, not like a proper impregnable one like the rain jacket. It'd probably just be a covering rather than an actual impregnated, like impermeable water, because they're too stiff and heavy. So I don't really have the volume to accommodate them. So, if nothing else, I just simply won't take them. Oatmeal, a must-have that I didn't take because I thought I could easily buy these in Europe, but they didn't sell them. And I really missed my oatmeal in the morning. It would have been great to have it on the stove. And that's one thing that I kind of regret not having taken. Another one is sort of like an instant hot chocolate. Coffee's fine, but it would have been nice at night to have some hot chocolate on a cold night, and then just simply before you go to bed. And then get the ones that have like not just cocoa, but it's cocoa, milk, and sugar all dried. And you just simply open it and pour it into the water, and you get a nice chocolate drink. Not necessarily so healthy, but tea bag will probably do the same thing. But it would have been nice to have some chocolate drink mix with me, something I'd probably take again. Freeze-dried food meals. The Adventure Foods is one line. There's several of them out there. I didn't take these because I thought they were pretty expensive. I think they're about 14 pounds, maybe 15 euros. Again, USD prices will be similar. They're not cheap. They are a bit bulky. Having said that, I had missed some of the, because of the variants I took, I missed some of the stock up villages and towns. So I started to run out of food on a few of the variants, and I didn't have anything to supplement that lack of food. So I would take probably at least 2 of these, and then supplement them by restocking, say in Courmayeur or Champex-Lac as you need them. But I would take at least probably 2 or 3 of these meals with you during the tour, so you have them available if you need them. Again, they're a bit pricey, but what are you going to do? If you go to a refuge, you're probably paying about 10 to 12 pounds for a pasta meal. So here you're paying 14, and you carry it with you if you're stuck. So I definitely would have taken at least 2 of these with me next time. The other thing I didn't have at the start was Gaia GPS. I did load it in Courmayeur, but I didn't quite get to use it and know how to use it exactly. So I would definitely get better prepared using Gaia GPS next time. I had to rely on, unfortunately, on some other hikers' knowledge using their GPS. So again, if you're going solo hike, you have to kind of rely on yourself, because you will find yourself alone sometimes. So you can't rely on other hikers. So I'm going to have to make sure next time I go to get Gaia GPS, know how to use it and get prepared for that. Again, you can't rely on that if your electronics goes down, hence the reason for the compass and the map alternative in case there's a backup. A Bic lighter, I didn't have one. I probably should have had one just to start a fire in case you need to. Let's say you get caught in a really bad rainstorm, you're completely soaked through, the winds come up, it's cold. You shouldn't be starting fires on the trail, but if it's a question of dying because of hypothermia, if you have to spend a night out and you're lost, you're going to want to have a fire started. So you should probably take a Bic lighter with you. Spare headlamp, battery, just in case if the battery runs out. It shouldn't, but make sure it's new. If you, let's say you buy a headlamp in 2024 and it sits in the cupboard for a year, and then you go and use it, and suddenly 3 hours into your tour your headlamp battery is dead because it's been sitting in the the device for over a year. So it's good to have spare battery in case you need it. A nice to have is a hot water bottle. I think if you recall, there was the one hiker beside me on the Col de la Croix de Bonhomme. It got to -5 that night, and she was, she couldn't sleep. It was so cold for her. She put all her clothes on, she got in her bag, and she still couldn't sleep. And had she had a hot water bottle, you basically take your stove, you fill it up with water just before boiling, because you can't pour boiling water into these. So you heat it up, you pour it into that, and I've done it in my other adventures before, and you'll sleep like a baby. It's incredible how much of a benefit a little hot water bottle will do. And these ones are hiking ones, so they're small and you can roll them up, and they're quite lightweight. So it's something to invest in. Nice to have if you can afford it, in terms of your volume and your mass in your rucksack. Weather apps, a must-have, along with GPS. Another thing I didn't have. There's several of them out there. Here's one, windy.com weather forecast. You really need to have a grip on the weather, because it has such an impact on your adventure, that being without it is going to be a huge disadvantage. So I'd almost say it's a must-have necessity. You must have it, probably along with GPS. Those are must-haves. I would not go and do it again without them. Knowing what the weather is going to be in the region that you're hiking, not the village that's 20 kilometers before you. Where you're hiking is critical. It's going to make a lot of your decisions based on the weather accurate, rather than what you heard 3 or 4 days ago from someone in the refuge. So, which I was unfortunately having to rely on quite a bit, is information from other hikers or refuges that they stated, well, it's going to be rainy, but when they say that, the weather in the mountain systems are changing. Like I said before, within a day you could get 5 different weather systems going through. It could be sunny, misty, rainy, thunderstorms, back to sunny. So knowing what the weather is going to be is critical to make your decisions on the hike, whether you should go for a long hike, whether you should go for a col. If there's a thunderstorm coming, you do not want to try and go over a col or be on a ridge, as I mentioned, for the possibility of being struck by lightning is quite high. So you're going to look at your weather app and make sure that where you're hiking is going to be good weather for hiking, and then so you want to go as far as you can. So that would be the other thing that I would definitely, those 2 apps would definitely be something that I'm going to have to improve on next time I go, because I was certainly weak in this area. And another item is like a Canon SureShot camera or similar. You can't take pictures with this, but there are a lot of spectacular views. If you have a camera along, you can certainly get a lot of those views and as memories when you come back to look back on. It's nice to have if you've got the volume and the mass. There's some load here that you have to carry, so you have to be you can't be stopping every 5 minutes on the tour to take a picture too, although I saw some people who were doing that. Cell signals, like I say, were possible even on Grand Col Ferret. I was able to reply to emails, so getting signals didn't seem to be a problem. I can't speak for all the trail if that remains true, but whenever I tried to use get signals on my cell, I didn't call anybody, but I was still able to read emails and do some light replies to emails and stuff like that. So I think in general the cell signals are quite good throughout the tour. But, in certain cases, you can't rely on that, right? If you fall down into a ravine, do you think you're going to get a cell signal in the ravine? No. So, you have to be cognizant that cell signals is sort of hit and miss throughout the tour. And then obviously if the weather is bad or there's some interference, your signal there could be a certain sector that simply has no signal. So you can't rely on signals all the time. This is what I actually saw one hiker carrying. I just kind of mentioned the SureShot here, but I actually saw a person hiking with they had the pole in one hand and they were holding onto this camera in their other hand, and it was really kind of a shocking sight. And she was a diminutive Japanese woman, and I actually stopped and had a good chat with her. And I don't know if she was making a book or she was, being paid for photographs, but it wasn't that she took this out and took a photo and then, disassembled it and put it in her back. She was actually hiking the trail with this in her hand all the time. And I asked her to, I took it in my hand, and it's quite heavy, as you can imagine. I mean, she's got this real huge telephoto lens, and, this isn't a light item. And she was hiking with this in her hand. And I thought she must have to put it back in her rucksack. And as she walked away, I kind of watched her for a while, and no, she still had it in her hand. So, she was taking photos, all over the place. And maybe she was making a book or some, I don't know what her purpose or reason, but she was definitely taking a lot of photos. And, I think it's a bit dangerous to do that, but, I'm sure she got some great shots. Maybe she was a professional hiker or professional photographer as well. Obviously, she's invested into it, so and maybe she's getting paid to take these photos. But yeah, I was quite surprised to see that. This is my Robins tent spec. So again, it's the Robins Starlight 1 EXP, and basically the thing is bomb-proof, which is what you need when you're in harsh weather conditions in the Alpine mountains. I think a lot of people underestimate just how treacherous the weather can be on the mountain, and if you're doing tent hiking, you're going to have a tent that's up to the task, and if you don't, you're going to suffer. You're going to be in trouble. This tent is rain tested on the outer fly, to a hydrostatic head of 5,000 millimeters. So what that means, for those who don't know what HH stands for, it's basically a column of water 5,000 meters high, and 1 millimeter in diameter, and they basically put it over the material, and they see whether the water, because of the pressure, whether it seeps through the material. So the higher this number is, the better waterproof this tent will be, and the lower it is, the more chance of continuous heavy rain that you're going to get wet. The water is going to seep through the material and start to come indoors. So when you're looking for a tent, you want to get the highest HH that you can. So 5,000 millimeters. They don't sell them right now any higher than that. Maybe there's some new material out. I think it's the Durston tent. Has Capilia. I don't know what the material. There's some new material that out. I don't know if it exceeds 5,000, but it's lightweight, and it might exceed 5,000. But it's kind of the new material that's on the market. I think it's a Durston tent. But otherwise, look for that HH number when you're buying your tent or considering your tent or reviewing your tent. You want this number to be as high as possible. If it's 5,000 or higher, you should be okay on the tour. If it's like 3,000 or 4,000, you may find yourself in a situation on a heavy rain day of actually getting wet. And the floor, a lot of times the lightweight tents, you have to bring a floor sheet with you. Just because the floor on the lightweight tent is really not meant to be used without a floor sheet. In this case, the floor has a 10,000 millimeter hydrostatic head, so you don't need an additional floor sheet, which you have to carry with you. They don't usually tell you that with the ultralight tent. They just, they sell you they kind of get you to buy in that the tent is lightweight, but then they tell you after you buy it, they say, oh yeah, but you have to also buy a floor sheet because the floor is usually thin, and if it's thin, it weighs less, right? So they want to make it thin because they want to give you, they sell you on the weight of the tent. So what I'm suggesting is that this is actually more efficient to the tent may be heavier, but you don't have to carry a ground sheet with you. So it's much better once you add the lightweight tent plus the ground sheet. You're not too far off of what you have here in terms of mass and performance. 10,000 millimeters on the floor is quite strong. So if it's raining and it stops water from coming up through the bottom into your tent compartment. So you don't need a ground sheet. And these are the marketing things that they try and hoodwink you over, and you buy a lightweight tent and then they say, oh yeah, by the way, you also need a ground sheet. So you've saved 500 grams by buying this expensive lightweight tent, and yet then they sell you, you need to buy a 500 gram ground sheet to go with it. So you're basically you spent 1,000 pounds and you're no different than the normal weight tent. So keep this stuff in mind when you're searching for tents. You can see here hydrostatic head. This is the spec sheet for the Robins. Hydrostatic head is 5,000 millimeters, and this is the material that's made out of. And then the ground sheet is 10,000 millimeter hydrostatic head. This material, this Hydrotex HD, the 75 denier polyester, 185 thread count for the fly, and the 75D polyester taffeta, 210 thread count, 100% polyester. These are materials that are usually used exclusively in the high-end tents, your Hillebergs and your some of the higher end tents that are usually around £1,000 or dollars. You're going to get these materials. In the low budget tents, you don't see these materials being used. They're simply they use other cheaper materials. So these are really strong and water repellent materials. And that's, I think a great benefit of this tent in performance is having these really high-end materials in what's considered a budget tent. This tent is wind tested to 160 kilometers, and it withstands 170 kilometer maximum winds. You will get some strong winds, especially on the coals. If you happen to pitch your tent at night near a coal, you can suddenly get really strong winds. If storms roll in, your winds can be strong. I'm not saying to these values, but it's certainly good to know that you have a wind-tested tent. I did pitch my tent just off of the Grand Col Ferret, and there were some gusts of wind at night, and I was glad, nothing that's going to destroy my tent, but I was glad I had that confidence that, my tent was going to be able to handle whatever nature threw at it, or at least, most of it. And then, not having that confidence, your tent could literally get destroyed by the wind. I've had other tents, and that's one reason I look for bomb-proof tents these days, is because I've had tents in the past that have been destroyed by wind. So it's good to have that confidence that no matter what wind is thrown at you, you're going to have confidence your tent can survive it. The weight is probably the biggest negative that people cite for not buying this tent, as I've heard, and it's 2 kilograms. The ultralight tents can go as low as, I think, 980 grams up to maybe 1.6 kilograms. So they're about 400 to 1 kilogram lighter than this tent. But, again, they probably require you to have a ground sheet. So this, if you buy a 1.6 kilogram tent, they tell you need a 500 gram ground sheet, you're now up to 2.1 kilograms. Well, I'm at 2. And you still have to carry that ground sheet. So your ultralight tent really isn't ultralight at all. You need a ground sheet. And the same thing with the lighter tent. I think the lightest one on the market right now is 980 grams for a one person. But, if you need, again, a 500 gram sheet, I'm only 500 grams lighter than what you're carrying. Or I don't know, maybe the ground sheet's 200. I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, but to make an argument. But in general, because I don't need a ground sheet, I don't have to carry one additional to what my tent weighs. So sometimes the tent weight itself isn't telling the true story. It's, do you need a ground sheet? You should always make sure you find out if you do or don't, because it's going to add to whatever weight they're selling you. But having these numbers and this performance for wind and rain, I think it's worth every gram for peace of mind. You're going to get heavy rain and strong wind conditions in the mountains, and you need to be prepared. If your tent isn't up to it, you're going to simply suffer. If your tent blows over or you get rained and all your gear gets wet at night, your experience is gone, and simply because you didn't get the correct gear that you need for the mountains. So invest in a good quality tent. And again, this tent from Alpine Trek, it was 135 pounds. I think it's tremendous value. I'm really, really impressed by the cost on this. I don't know how they can make the tent for that much money, and it's not so popular. You're probably going to be able to find them online for around this price. I would grab it if you want to do hiking in mountains. I think it's tremendous value. The only knock I say is this mass. But I don't mind that mass. I mean, I'll definitely carry it for this type of performance. So again, the ultralights these days, they tend to be ultra expensive. So this is 135. The other ones are coming in at maybe anywhere between 500 to 1,200 pounds. So multiple times, and you're having to worry about ground sheet. I always was interested in the campsites to talk to other people who had tents. I talked to a person who had the Big Agnes, which is quite popular tent. In the morning, I helped her, take her tent down and put it in her rucksack. So we took the fly sheet and we were like, you get two people on both corners and you shake it up and down to get the water out. And what surprised me about it was that we shook it for quite a few minutes, and then there was nothing left to shake, but you could see in the material there was still moisture saturation, which was surprising. There wasn't no rain that night. It was simply condensation, but it got impregnated into the fly. And so when you fold up that tent, even though it's a lightweight tent, and quite popular and expensive, I think they're around 600 to 700 pounds, the Big Agnes, depending on which one you get. But because it had water still impregnated in the material, even after shaking it, guess where all that mass goes? In your rucksack. So you could have, like, let's say you had 250 milliliters of water. Well, that becomes like 250 grams of extra mass. So again, your ultralight, is it ultralight if it absorbs water? No. So that water becomes extra carrying mass, and plus you've got a wet fly to put up when you set your tent up again. So you're carrying water in the material, and I was really surprised at that because that's got a lot of good reviews, the Big Agnes. I'm surprised that material retained the water. I don't know why. I can't comment. I'm just saying that was the experience that I saw. I met another person who had an MSR. Their comment to me there was condensation issues that were, putting water in their tent in the morning, so they were a bit disappointed in that. This is another high-end tent. The Hubba Hubba is one. There's other ones that are available, but MSR Hubba Hubba. But they didn't have the Hubba Hubba. They had a different one. But they said the condensation was a factor for them, so they were a bit disappointed. There was also a guy next to me on the Col de la Croix de Bon home who had a Durston tent. I don't know if his name is Durston, but maybe the material is Durston. But this one of these really ultralight tents with the pole. Used your trekking pole as a tent pole, and it has the fancy material, the new fancy material. It's lightweight. I think that's the one that's like 980 grams compared to 2 kilograms. So you save over a kilogram of weight. But he complained about moisture in the morning as well. He said some of his gear was getting wet. So, ultralight is it's ultra expensive, and I don't think the performance is as good as they claim. I don't know what these tents would stand up in this type of heavy rain, heavy wind conditions. I don't know if they usually aren't tested to anything like this. These numbers, they may, some of them may meet the rain test, but I'm not sure about the wind tests. So you want to spec these out and compare them to this tent if you're considering buying one. But in general, a lot of this ultralight trend is just a money-making machine. And then at the end of the day, you could be looking at having to either carry water from the materials or having to carry a ground sheet, which gets you closer to what this number is. There are Hilleberg tents as well, which are probably the top line elite tents these days. Again, the costs go up, and whether the performance, they're using similar materials to here, so whether the performance probably is similar, but you're at 1,200 pounds and I'm at 135. Make it make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. I think if you're looking at buying a tent, I would grab this. I would even buy 3 of these just to make sure I had one for the next 3 decades, because when one gets worn out, I'll simply use the other one. I think these are tremendous value. There's 2 other drawbacks on this tent that I'll measure. And again, the body fit versus the ultralight argument. I would always worry about getting your body weight down rather than your rucksack weight. So don't spend all your money on these big, expensive, lightweight tents. Lose 10 kilograms rather than trying to save 500 grams. Lose 10 kilograms on your body so you don't have to carry it up the mountains and down them. Rather than just trying to buy your way through. Consider losing your body weight. The 2 things I need to mention on other things I want to mention, again, as I was saying before, mass and volume in your rucksack. Now this is coming in at 15 centimeters and 39 centimeters, and that's a water bottle for comparison. This pack volume here is driven by the end tent poles. There's 4 of them around the tent. I'll just go back and show you what that tent looks like. You can see here, so there's 4 of those poles, and there's a single pole there. That's all the poles that you have on this tent. What you can do, this is one of the drawbacks of the Robins tent. For some reason, they designed it with screw tabs on both ends of this pole. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to simply leave these poles in and then fold up the tent, and you stick it in the carry bag, and then basically that's the numbers you get that you have to stick in your rucksack. You can improve on this. What you do is you remove the end caps and you put some shock cord with the standard tent ends that you can buy online for like £3, and you get yourself some shock cord and you install shock cord with those ends. What that allows you to do is then basically pull these tent poles out, and obviously the central one collapses. This one here collapses. The big central one collapses. So you can, what I was doing was taking the tent poles away from the tent, collapsing the poles and putting them on the inside compartment, and then allows you to take this volume and almost collapse it to this line here. And that little volume there now becomes what you can reduce the volume of the overall tent to that size, and that allowed me to stick my tent in this lower compartment. As I said, there was 2 compartments. This is the dry compartment where I had my tent poles inside, and then there's the lower compartment where I stuck my tent and my rain jacket down here, which is so if the tent's wet or has some moisture on it, you have a barrier here between your dry clothes. So I always put my tent in the bottom compartment, and that way I was able to fit my tent into my rucksack simply by doing this little trick. And it's not hard to do. It's easily resolved. One of the problems I got into, and it's my fault, it's not the tent's fault. So I did that change on my tent as recommended, but when I put the end caps on, when I got out on the tour, what I found is that the material was too tight to get the poles easily in and out of the eyelets. So I had 2 of them that were easily put in, and the other 2 were too stiff. So at that time I had a bit of a problem, because now I couldn't put my tent poles into my main compartment. I couldn't squish my tent down to this lower volume, which meant I had to carry it on the outside, which was a real problem. So I had to make a fix, and when I got to Courmayeur, I ended up spending another day there simply to try and resolve this problem of these tent poles that I should have checked before I went, but I assumed, unfortunately, that there wouldn't be a problem, but there was. I simply couldn't get them because they're higher, and the material wasn't enough. The material wasn't loose enough. So what I had to do was to figure out a way how to reduce 2 of these poles so that I could get them to fit in the material. I actually got them to fit the first night, but it was really a challenge, and because the material was just so tight that I had to really force them in. And then obviously once I got them in, getting them out was harder, and I ended up having to carry the tent outside of my rucksack, which I didn't want to do. It didn't really have a good hanging method, and it was sort of swaying back and forth at the back of the rucksack. So I needed to try to avoid that. And when I got into Courmayeur, I immediately started to look for, well, actually the next day, the first day I was there, I didn't go out. The second day I was there, I started to look for, there was an automotive repair store nearby. So I went there and I asked them to see if I could take the shock cord out in the 2 ends on 2 of the poles and simply put a bolt on either end, which would have solved the problem. But when I got there, they didn't have any bolts that fit this thread, which was a bit disappointing and a bit surprising. So they recommended that I go to a hardware store. There was a local hardware store nearby. So I walked down to that store. They didn't speak Italian, or they didn't speak English, and obviously I didn't speak Italian. So trying to explain what I was looking for, I used my Google Translate and simply typed it in, and then translated it and let the store owner read it. And he took the poles into the back room, and he was spending about 10 minutes going through all his hardware boxes to find bolts that would fit this tent pole, because I had them, but I left them at home. I didn't bring them with me because I didn't think I would need them. So I just put the new ones in, the new tips that don't have threads. They just go to the shock cord. So he came back and he said he didn't have any threads that fit that. It's some special thread. It's not what you would consider a standard thread, metric thread. So Robins had used special threads on these poles for whatever reason, and they would only accept the end caps that came with the poles. So now I was stuck and still not being able to install my end poles onto my tent with ease. And so I decided to, after thinking about it for a while, I decided I would try and get a hacksaw and then simply cut the poles short, and then put the shock cord in with the two ends as it existed. I thought I probably needed to cut about 3 or 4 millimeters off two of the poles to get them to actually work. So now the question was to find a hacksaw in Courmayeur, which is, basically a skiing and tourist town. And I went back to the hardware store, and I asked him for one, and he said he did have one, but it was just a small bow, sort of like a hobbyist hacksaw. It wasn't really a full proper industrial hacksaw. So I took it because that's all they had available. And then the question was to I didn't have a vise to hold the pole in while I cut it. And I recall when I was walking to the hotel, there was a tree stump on one of the side paths off the main road that had a tree stump with some notches and things in it. So I went there and I put the tent pole against the tree notch to give it a bit of support while I held it with my thumb. And then I started to try to cut the pole down, which I thought would be quite a simple task to do. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the equation you're on, but because these are bomb-proof tents, Robins decided to make these out of hardened 70-75 aluminum. Not hardened, but it's a higher grade aluminum than what's standardly used for aluminum, which is 60-61, which is quite soft, and the hacksaw blade would have cut through it quite readily, but they made it through the higher strength 70-75 aircraft aluminum, which is used in aircrafts, and so it was becoming really difficult to even scorch it, never mind cut it. So what I did is I would sort of mark one face of it, and then rotate it a bit and mark another face, and then just kept rotating and marking it. And obviously once I got cut so deep that it went through the wall, it started to really bind because it was, there wasn't enough material. So I just kept scorching around the end of it, or the edge of it, and rotating it as I cut a little bit deeper, and eventually it did cut. It took about 15 minutes to cut, and there were lots of local people walking by while I was doing this, and obviously looking at me quite strange, wondering what I was doing, but I kept my focus on my task and simply kept my head down and kept cutting. So I was able to get one of them cut. The unfortunate part is because it is a tougher grade of aluminum, the blade was starting to get dull, and also it started to get deflected a bit because I was putting so much force on it that it actually started to bend the blade. So it was no longer straight and flat. It had lots of waffles and bends in it, which probably meant it was about to snap and break. So I had to start to cut the other blade, or the other pull down as well. And using the same method, I started to cut it. Unfortunately, a lot of the neighboring houses had let their dogs out, and I had a new stereo of dogs barking because, of course, the steel was, the blade on the aluminum was making a lot of high-pitched sound. So I had all these dogs around the neighborhood starting to bark, and again the locals were walking by and looking at me really curiously. But I again ignored it all and just put my head down and feverishly cut another 3 millimeters off the second pole. And thankfully it finally gave way before the blade broke, and there was really probably no teeth left on the blade by the time I cut through it. And I was able to reduce the length of these two poles and then put the shock cord back in, and job done, back in business. I was able to put the tent into the lower compartment where I like to put it, and my tour was back on. So I just about got derailed. I'm not sure I would have been able to complete the tour, to be honest, if I wasn't able to get this task done. And Courmayeur is probably the biggest, town on the trail next to Chamonix, and I'm sure a lot of the smaller villages weren't going to have hacksaws available for this task. So in the end, it actually worked out barely, but it did work out. It was my fault, really. I should have corrected this before I went and checked it to make sure it worked. But time was short, and I did the best I could. And I didn't expect to see this as a problem, but thankfully I solved it. And I was able to get back on my horse and start hiking again the next day. So it actually all worked out, but it was a little bit of a nervous moment there when I was running out of ideas on how to actually resolve it. So all done. Now I'm going to discuss my pack weight, which I think is going to show you really how I calculated that number I had talked about before, which was 11.74 kilograms for my load. What I did is I basically took all the items and I've listed here the makes and models. So if you're a tech geek like myself and you like to go through all the different makes and models on the market and find out which one you think is better suited for your hike, you can certainly see I'll just quickly read through at least the hiking gear. The rest are not as important, but I had again the Robin Starlight 1 Expedition tent. I had a Rab Ascent 500 down sleeping bag. I had a Mountain Equipment Venture 40-liter rucksack. I had a Sea to Summit Ultra Pro Light pillow, so you blow up pillow. I had an OEX or Oaks Eero stove. I had a Thermarest Pro Light Apex regular width sleeping pad. I had Lecky Kumbu Light trekking poles. I had a Black Diamond Cosmo 350 LED light headlamp. I had an Extreme Weather C100 gas canister. I had the Platypus Quick Draw water filter system. That was probably the only item, as I said before, that really, I think, disappointed. All the rest of it, I think, did yeoman duty. It was really up to the task. Maybe the Black Diamond, in the end, could have been a better quality, but I wasn't really expecting to do night hiking, so I was using it, really expected to just use it in the tent or around the campsite. I actually ended up doing night hiking with it, so possibly should have had a better quality or more lumen, higher lumen headlamp. I'll have to look into that next time. Again, my long sleeve shirt was an Icebreaker Merino Wool 260 Berghaus t-shirt, made by Mountains. Socks, that's 100% merino wool, not a blend. I had super wool socks as well, which were 100% merino wool. I had my Morel MOAB Mother of All Boots 3 Gore-Tex. I had some Berghaus Ellswick hiking pants. I was really pleased with those. I had a Rab Men's Microlight down jacket LRG. That was really nice. I had the Columbia Bora Bora Boonie wide brim sun hat, essential. I had some North Face fleece beanie, North Face red fleece gloves, Rab Men's firewall jacket. That's my rain gear. I had Quechua hiking sunglasses MH580. Again, another essential, and then the rest of it is, basically I got the surf socks at Decathlon. The rest of it is basically, everyday stuff and gear. There's nothing really special. And these here are I measured or took off the manufacturer's numbers, the weight of all of these items, and then simply added them up. And I did that for all my gear. as best I could. I think most of these numbers are fairly accurate, although some people complain that, you know, some of the numbers the manufacturers were providing were not true. But, you know, I wasn't really quibbling about an extra, you know, 0.1 kilograms here, 100 grams here or there. So, you know, you got to kind of average it out. So I broke it down into sections: hiking gear, clothing, hardware, which is stuff like toothpaste and, you know, guidebooks and stuff like that, and then food and water. And I got all my numbers here. And then I got my gear total and what was worn on my body. And then that was my final rucksack carry weight, which is 11.74. I didn't actually measure it, but I suspect it was quite close to that, which was 14.8% of my total body weight, which was less than 20%, which is the maximum target. And here's just a pie chart breakdown. So 51% of my rucksack weight was hiking gear. These items here. 25% was hiking clothing. 7% was hardware, and then, you know, the last 17% was food and water. But obviously this is, you know, as you start your hike, you have more mass here, and then as you're eating and consuming, you know, this number is always in flux, whereas these numbers were for the most part constant. And that's the where I got my my pack weight numbers from. And I think by the end of the trail, I really didn't feel this weight much. You know, you start to get used to carrying the rucksack, and I didn't really feel it that much when I finished. You know, I felt it quite a bit when I started, but when I finished the tour, I was, you know, it was quite common to be carrying that with me, and it didn't really seem to feel as heavy by the end of the tour as it did at the start of the tour, which is maybe kind of surprising, because you'd think you'd get more tired and it would start to feel worse. But I didn't really start to feel the load after a while. In terms of the volume, you know, 40 liters. I think it's a good. It's small, and you do have to restrict what you put in there, and but it's a nice size, because if you're doing some of the, like, you know, some of the scrambling or, you know, hiking / mountain climbing routes like the Fenêtre des Arpets, you don't really want a large rucksack that's going to get tangled into the surrounding geography as you're climbing through it. So it was nicer to have a smaller rucksack, and it fit my body well. I think the load was distributed quite well over my body. I never had a sore back or, you know, any shoulder pains or neck pains at all, which actually, in hindsight, it kind of surprised me, because, you know, you'd think after a while your shoulders would get sore, your neck or your back. But I never had any, you know, musculoskeletal aches and pains from carrying that load. So I think in general that's a testament to that rucksack. The mountain equipment Venture 40L, it's a little bit heavy at 1.5 kilograms, but I think it's quite a good, you know, budget rucksack. And, you know, it's certainly not as expensive as the more famous Osprey, which a lot of people had were Osprey rucksacks. But, you know, it's got a inbuilt rain cover as well. And I thought it performed quite well. I think overall I would give it, you know, an 8 out of 10. You know, maybe there's better rucksacks out there that are 2 or 3 or 4 times more expensive than. I think I paid 60 pounds for this. So, you know, I know the Ospreys are up in the maybe 200 pound range. So, you know, for 3 times the cost, was it really 3 times better than my rucksack? I'm not sure. So for a budget, you know, I think this was pretty good value. Similar to my tent, I think it was good value. And would I take it again? I think I would. It seemed to perform really well. It's got a dry bag inside for the dry compartment, so you don't have to have like a separate plastic bag to carry around with you. And your dry gear is going to stay dry. It's got that lower compartment that fits quite nice with my tent. So even if there's a bit of moisture on it, it's not going to contaminate and get my dry gear wet. It's got nice side pockets on the outside that allow you to put all your hardware and your you know, some food and stuff in there. You can put your water bottle on the side pockets, and you can always tie things to it. You know, I used to tie my neoprene shoes on the outside to let them dry while I hiked, and so there's a lot of good things I think to say about that. I think it performed well. I don't have really like it. It didn't fail. There was no zippers that got broke or any material got ripped or. I think it's really good value, that Mountain Equipment Venture 40L. And that's the end of this section, and we'll go forward on part 3 after this.